What happens when the immovable force of an individual's deeply held convictions meets the irresistible power of absolute authority? It's a question, isn't it? Echoed through history, sparked countless conflicts, shaped societies.
It really has. And today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a life that perfectly embodies this eternal tension, a story that honestly still resonates so powerfully across the centuries.
Indeed. Our focus for this deep dive is the extraordinary world of Thomas More, a figure who truly stood at the crossroads, didn't he, between the late medieval era and the burgeoning Renaissance.
Absolutely. He's a man whose legacy is, well, it's as complex as his life. Celebrated as a saint by some, condemned as a traitor by others.
And maybe most widely remembered for that visionary book about an ideal island, the one that gifted us a word now so deeply embedded in our language, Utopia.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Utopia. So for this deep dive, we're drawing from some pretty comprehensive historical excerpts titled Thomas More, Conscience, Utopia, and the Rule of Law.
Right. And our mission really is to meticulously unpack More's early life, the foundational experiences that shaped his brilliant mind, then trace his meteoric rise through the ranks of Tudor England.
Delve into that dramatic clash of conscience that ultimately defined his, well, his tragic end.
And explore the enduring legacy of his ideas and writings, particularly those, frankly, radical concepts he laid out in Utopia.
Get ready, because you're about to discover why his personal courage, his intellectual prowess, and his unwavering principles still challenge us and spark debates even today.
So let's begin at the very start. More's journey, his formative years. These early experiences weren't just a prelude, they were the crucible, really, where his extraordinary Renaissance mind was forged.
Okay, so Thomas More, born February 7th, 1478, right in the heart of London, Cheapside. A bustling place even then, I imagine.
Oh, undoubtedly. He came from what our sources describe as a rising merchant gentry family. His father, Sir John More, was a successful lawyer, so ambition and intellect were sort of in the background already.
Right. And this wasn't just any time in England. You have to remember, this was just after the Wars of the Roses finally ended, the Battle of Bosworth in 1485.
A period of huge change. Imagine living in a society where that old feudal order was visibly crumbling, and a new centralized power, the Tudors, was just beginning to take shape.
Precisely. Post-Bosworth England was marked by, well, significant political instability, certainly, but also, crucially, by incredible social mobility.
So opportunity amidst the chaos.
Exactly. The new Tudor dynasty was consolidating power, systematically dismantling the remnants of that old feudal system, pushing towards a more centralized authority.
And More's childhood was shaped by this flux.
Profoundly. He was born into a family astute enough to navigate, maybe even leverage these shifts, positioning themselves for influence in a transforming nation. This environment, where tradition met this nascent modernity, it seems almost tailor-made to produce a mind like More's. Adaptable, yet principled.
It's truly fascinating how that early environment, where the old order was visibly giving way to the new, could foster such a keen observer, a nuanced thinker, and ultimately a reformer.
And his education was key. Absolutely foundational.
He started, as many ambitious young men did, in a grammar school, focus on Latin, rhetoric, then off to Oxford, likely Canterbury College.
Right. Immersing himself in classical Latin grammar, logic, basic arithmetic. But, like you hinted, these weren't just standard subjects for him. The intellectual climate he entered was crucial.
How so? What was going on at Oxford then?
It was buzzing with the fresh ideas of early English humanism. More was exposed to pioneers like John Colet, William Grocyn, Thomas Linacre. These weren't just academics in dusty rooms.
No.
No, they were intellectual giants challenging the prevailing scholasticism, that dense, often dogmatic medieval approach to philosophy and theology.
Right, very abstract, very rigid sometimes.
Exactly. The humanists advocated a return to classical sources, ad fontes to the sources, emphasizing original texts, eloquent prose, and the practical application of wisdom to human life. It was a radical shift, a more direct, vibrant engagement with ancient thought.
And it was within this ferment, this intellectual excitement, that More developed something quite special, a remarkable early proficiency in Greek.
Yes, and this wasn't just about adding another language to his CV, so to speak. In the late 15th, early 16th centuries, access to Greek texts was still pretty rare in Western Europe.
Most scholars were working from Latin translations.
Often translations centuries removed from the original source. More's ability to read Aristotle, Plato, and crucially the early church fathers like Augustine and Chrysostom in their original Greek. Well, it was a game changer.
They put him in a different league.
Absolutely. An elite humanist circle. It allowed him to engage with the nuanced arguments of these foundational thinkers directly, unfiltered by layers of translation or medieval commentary. It was like gaining a direct line to the intellectual wellsprings of Western civilization.
That direct engagement, grappling with the arguments themselves, appreciating their original context, you can see how that would shape him.
Transformative. It honed his critical thinking, instilled a deep respect for foundational principles, a characteristic that would define his entire life, really, and ultimately his final stand. It speaks to a mind that craved authenticity, intellectual purity.
So from that rich intellectual world of Oxford, he then transitions, quite seamlessly it seems, into the rigorous world of law, which, for a man of his intellect and ambition, feels like a natural progression.
It does. He began his legal studies in 1494, following the time-honored tradition of London's Inns of Court. First New Inn, then the more prestigious Lincoln's Inn.
And this wasn't just about memorizing statutes, was it? It was more like an education in the very fabric of English society and governance.
You're absolutely right. This legal training was incredibly sophisticated for its time. It fostered this unique integration of two distinct legal traditions.
Okay, which were
You had the highly rational, codified system of Roman law, emphasis on universal principles, abstract reasoning, and then you had the more custom-based pragmatism of English common law evolving through judicial precedent, local tradition.
a real blend then.
A crucial blend for More. It taught him to think in terms of both abstract principles of justice and the practical, often messy application of law in daily life. This dual perspective would define his professional career, especially as a judge and later as Lord Chancellor, navigating complex disputes with both intellectual rigor and practical wisdom.
And amidst all this intense study, something else happens. Summer of 1499, a pivotal moment. The first visit to England of the legendary Erasmus of Rotterdam.
Ah, Erasmus. This encounter ignited a lifelong friendship, one of the most celebrated intellectual partnerships of the Renaissance, truly.
Erasmus, already a towering figure of European humanism.
Yeah.
What did he make of More?
He was immediately and profoundly impressed. Captivated by More's incredible mental clarity, his quick wit, that captivating humor you mentioned earlier, and his exceptional philological expertise, that mastery of ancient languages.
He saw a kindred spirit.
Absolutely. Someone who could not only master languages, but wield them with this almost playful precision, using them to explore the deepest paradoxes of human existence.
It's a wonderful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
Two of the greatest minds of their era just sparking off each other. And didn't Erasmus write his most famous work while staying with More?
He did. The praise of Folly Marius and Encomium in Greek, penned while staying at More's home. And as a playful nod to their friendship and More's own reputation for paradox and wit,
He put in a pun.
a brilliant one, Erasmus deliberately incorporated an ironic reference to More's surname, More, with the Greek word morie, which means folly. It's this delightful, layers-deep intellectual joke that speaks volumes about their shared sense of humor and mutual respect.
It's fantastic, a testament to their relationship, and perhaps that playful jab at More's folly hinted at More's engagement with those human paradoxes, the very themes that become central later, especially in Utopia.
I think that's a great point. It wasn't just a joke, it was an acknowledgement of More's unique intellectual perspective.
Now, before More fully committed to the demanding path of public life, he embarked on something quite different, a fascinating, intense spiritual quest.
Yes, between roughly 1499 and 1503, a period of profound spiritual retreat at the Charterhouse, a Carthusian monastery near London. This wasn't a casual exploration. It was a deep dive into monastic discipline.
So what did that involve?
Months of strict daily discipline, midnight vigils, extended fasting, vows of silence. He was deeply immersed in the Carthusian way of life, known for its rigorous asceticism and solitary contemplation.
Not just dipping his toe in then.
Not at all. It was a profound personal immersion, and it steered him away from the more dry, abstract scholastic theology prevalent then, drawing him instead towards a much more personal, internal piety, spiritual reflection, seeking a deeper connection with the divine, unburdened by rigid academic debates.
But here's the fascinating part, the bit that's quite telling about his character. Despite this intense spiritual experience, his admiration for the monastic life, he consciously chose not to become a full monk.
Right. He weighed the contemplative life heavily. Yet ultimately, his core belief settled on something he'd later articulate as virtue in action.
Virtue in action.
It became a central tenet in his later writings, his philosophy, often referred to as the active contemplative life. For more, true piety, true spiritual growth didn't necessarily require withdrawal from the world.
So you could balance spiritual reflection with active ethical engagement in society, public service even.
Exactly. He truly believed that piety could and perhaps should be lived outside monastery walls.
That decision, it offers profound insight into his character, his humanist convictions.
It really does. Serving God not just through cloistered withdrawal, but through public service, ethical engagement, the practical application of one's virtues. Remarkably forward-thinking for his era, highlighting that humanist emphasis on applying classical wisdom and Christian values in the practical, often challenging world.
That internal balance, that conviction, it really laid the groundwork for his astonishing public career, didn't it?
It absolutely did. And his journey into the political arena began surprisingly early, hinting at that remarkable trajectory. Elected to the House of Commons Parliament of the Commons back then in 1504, he was only 26.
Young. And he didn't just sit quietly at the back, did he?
Not a chance. His very first significant public speech was a balanced, yet remarkably oppositional defense against King Henry VIII's heavy tax demands.
Risky move, challenging Henry VII.
Incredibly risky. Henry VII was known for his strong will, his careful fiscal management. Moore's speech demonstrated not just his sharp legal mind, but also his early courage, his skill in navigating delicate political situations, framing dissent not as disloyalty, but as a principled stand for the common good.
Alongside this budding public life, his personal life was evolving significantly. Mary Jane Colt in 1505 started a family.
Yes, but tragically, she passed away prematurely in 1511, leaving him with 3 young daughters, Margaret, Elizabeth, Cecily, and a son, John. A profound loss, surely.
It must have been. But it also leads us to this remarkable, often cited detail about his household, something about education.
Ah, yes, this brings us to a fascinating aspect of Moore's progressive views. Our sources note this widespread folkloric account, though it seems pretty well founded, that Moore's household was one of the very first to implement a truly humanist curriculum for all children, regardless of gender.
All children. So his daughters got the same education as his son.
Exactly. Rigorous classical education, Latin, Greek, rhetoric, philosophy, arithmetic. Subjects usually reserved exclusively for boys. For the early 16th century, this was nothing short of revolutionary.
Wow. What does that tell us about him?
It tells us he believed intellectual development was a universal human pursuit, not limited by gender. That a well-educated mind was essential for character formation, moral reasoning. A deeply humanist ideal. It speaks volumes about his character, his belief in the transformative power of education, shaping a complete ethical individual.
Actively championing that for his daughters, when most girls were tutored only in domestic skills, it truly sets him apart.
It does. He then remarried in 1510 to Alice Middleton, a widowed merchant, providing crucial domestic stability for him and his 4 young children, allowing him to manage his family responsibilities while continuing his rise in public service.
And that domestic stability provided the foundation for his continued ascent. 1510, he's selected as London City's undersheriff, a significant local role.
Oh, yes. A position of considerable power and influence. Essentially, the chief legal and administrative assistant to the sheriffs of London. Broad judicial responsibilities, commercial disputes between merchants, advising on criminal cases, adjudicating them even.
So immersing him in the practicalities of urban law and governance.
Precisely. Honing his judicial acumen, his public management skills. A vital stepping stone. Gave him a deep understanding of London's complex legal and economic life.
And his proven diplomatic abilities, that profound knowledge of common law and court procedures, it didn't go unnoticed.
Not by the ambitious new monarch, King Henry VIII. Henry was actively seeking out talented, intelligent, articulate men for his burgeoning court, eager to surround himself with brilliant minds. Moore, with his reputation for integrity and sharp intellect, fit the bill perfectly.
And Henry put him to work quickly.
Immediately. Appointed to represent English merchants in vital trade negotiations in Flanders in 1515, complex stuff, dealing with the flow of goods, money the bedrock of England's economy.
And it was during this trip something clicked.
Yes. During his return journey from these intricate real-world diplomatic discussions, a profound idea began to take root. He started conceptualizing Utopia, sketching out the radical ideas, the structures that would form his most famous work.
So the seeds of that ideal society were sown not in academic isolation, but during practical, demanding real-world diplomacy.
Exactly. Illustrating his unique ability to bridge the ideal with the pragmatic. A fascinating crossover.
From the grubby details of trade negotiations to envisioning a perfect world, it just highlights the breadth of his mind, and his star kept rising.
Rapidly. Knighthood in 1521, clear sign of growing royal favor, largely for assisting Henry VIII with his vigorous anti-Lutheran work, Assertio Septem Sacramentorum, a defense of the seven sacraments.
So at this point, More and the king were intellectually aligned, on theology at least.
It seems so. This collaboration underscored More's staunchly Catholic views at the time and solidified his place in the king's inner circle.
And then the true culmination of his public career, Lord Chancellor in 1529, succeeding Cardinal Wolsey.
A monumental achievement, signaled his supreme importance to the crown. And, crucially, More became the first lay non-clerical chief judge in English history.
That's a big deal.
Huge. Before him, the position was almost exclusively held by powerful clergymen, often archbishops. His appointment signified the growing power of the secular administration, but also More's undeniable reputation. Integrity, unparalleled legal prowess, perceived trustworthiness in the eyes of the king. He was now at the very pinnacle of political and judicial power.
What an incredible trajectory, London family to the highest judicial office. But as we know, this pinnacle of power would soon bring him to his ultimate test. That profound clash between personal conscience and royal authority, the one that would forever define his legacy.
The Lord Chancellorship. It was, as our sources emphasized, this paradoxical position, immense legal authority, yet combined with a deeply ingrained sense of humility, of service. The keeper of the king's conscience, he was often called.
Meaning he was responsible for equity, for justice where the common law might fall short, the ultimate arbiter of fairness.
Exactly. And More didn't shy away from reform. Showed his commitment to justice for all, not just the powerful. He initiated efforts to reduce court costs, which often financially crippled litigants, and to shorten those notoriously lengthy litigation processes, making justice more accessible.
And he tackled enclosure, too, that privatization of common lands.
Yes, perhaps most notably. That process was devastating, displacing countless rural families, driving them into poverty. More's efforts were significant social and legal reforms aimed directly at improving the lives of ordinary people, reflecting the very critiques he'd later articulate in Utopia.
But here's where the narrative takes that dramatic turn. The tension comes into sharp focus. These commendable reforms, they were increasingly overshadowed.
Overshadowed and, indeed, ultimately derailed by King Henry VIII's escalating personal desires, his fundamental clash with existing constitutional and ecclesiastical limitations, the king's fervent desire for a male heir, his burgeoning affection for Anne Boleyn. They were about to ignite a firestorm.
A firestorm that would consume the entire English political and religious landscape, placing more directly in its path.
Exactly. From 1527 onwards, what became known as the King's Great Matter dominated everything. Henry's desperate desire for the annulment of his long-standing marriage to Catherine of Aragon,
His first wife.
and his intent to marry Anne Boleyn. This wasn't just a royal divorce. It swiftly escalated into a direct, unprecedented confrontation with papal authority, challenging centuries of established religious and political order.
And for More, this wasn't just loyalty to Rome or a simple legal dispute.
Oh, infinitely more profound. He viewed the king's demand for an annulment and his subsequent break from Rome as deeply implicating the rational continuity, the dogmatic integrity of the universal church order. To More, the Pope's authority was divinely ordained, an unbroken succession from St. Peter, upholding the sanctity of marriage as a sacrament. He saw the king's actions as a fundamental disruption of established divine and natural law, not just a legal technicality. His conscience, therefore, was inextricably tied to his understanding of universal church authority and tradition, a bond he considered inviolable.
This unshakable conviction, rooted in those deep theological and legal principles, it made his eventual resignation inevitable, didn't it?
Morally inevitable. On May 16, 1532, More deliberately stepped down, explicitly objecting to the decisions transferring supreme earthly head authority in church matters from the Pope to the king. He could not, in good conscience, serve a government that was fundamentally altering what he perceived as the divine order. A silent but profoundly eloquent act of defiance.
After resigning, he tried to step back. Scholarly retirement at home in Chelsea.
He did, hoping, perhaps naively, for a quiet life of study and prayer, removed from the escalating turmoil. But the king's demands for absolute allegiance wouldn't allow it.
The oath of supremacy.
That was the true test. April 1534. More refused to take the oath, which would have formally acknowledged Henry as supreme head of the new Church of England, repudiating papal authority.
And that refusal led directly to
Imprisonment in the infamous Tower of London. just a week later.
Imagine that transition from Lord Chancellor to a solitary cell in the tower.
Harrowing. He endured about 15 months of solitary confinement, systematically deprived of books, writing materials of deliberate cruelty for a man like him. Yet it's during this agonizing period that some of his most profound, moving writings emerged, smuggled out by his devoted daughter, Margaret.
Those letters.
His Latin and English letters, penned under immense duress, sent to Margaret Roper, close friends. Truly unique documents. They offer an unparalleled glimpse into the mind of a man facing the ultimate pressure.
Revealing the legal, the spiritual anatomy of that tension. Conscience versus authority.
Meticulously. Showcasing his unwavering faith, his formidable legal mind, his deep paternal affection. They're considered early, poignant examples of prison literature, an intimate, raw look into a soul grappling with impossible choices.
Then the trial. July 1st, 1535, Westminster Hall.
Essentially a show trial, a foregone conclusion orchestrated by the king's agents. He was unlawfully denied the right to present a proper defense. His arguments ignored, dismissed, underscores the arbitrary, unjust nature of the proceedings, designed not to seek truth, but to secure a conviction.
And then the final act, execution, July 6, 1535, beheaded on Tower Hill.
And his last words on the scaffold, famously etched into political ethics, moral philosophy.
I die the king's good servant, but God's first.
That single, concise sentence encapsulates the essence of his struggle. Not a rejection of loyalty to his sovereign, but a profound declaration of a higher, unyielding loyalty to his conscience, to what he believed was God's ultimate authority, a statement that has resonated through centuries, a powerful testament to principled defiance.
Those words, they echo across centuries, don't they? Challenging us to consider our own ultimate loyalties, a testament to his unwavering commitment, even at the cost of his life. And this profound, tragic story is intrinsically linked to his most enduring literary creation, the work that continues to spark debate, Utopia. Let's dive deeper into his works, the powerful ideas they contain.
Absolutely. Utopia, published 1516, arguably More's most famous, certainly his most influential work. A text interpreted in countless ways, testament to its richness, its ambiguities, its enduring relevance, a cornerstone of political philosophy.
The writing process itself is interesting, completed largely at his friend Peter Giles's home in Antwerp during a diplomatic mission, first printed in Leuven.
But that 1518 Basel edition is notable, included Erasmus's meticulous corrections, highlighting that deep intellectual partnership again, honed by the best humanist minds.
But it needed translation to really catch on in England.
Right. Ralph Robinson's 1551 English translation truly brought the conceptual resonance of this ideal island to a broader English-speaking audience, ignited widespread discussion about his radical proposals.
And the narrative form is clever, too. 2 books.
Ingenious, really, crucial to its multifaceted interpretations. Book 1, a dialogue. More, Erasmus, Peter Giles, and the fictional sailor scholar, Raphael Hythloday.
Hythloday, the one who's been to Utopia.
Exactly. This section serves as a critical mirror, reflecting and dissecting the flaws of contemporary European institutions, especially Tudor England. Hythloday contrasts Utopia's wisdom with Europe's follies.
And then book 2 gets into the details.
The real deep dive. A meticulously detailed description of Utopia itself. Geography, that island crescent, almost a self-contained world. Social structure, economic system, family law, religion, warfare, diplomacy, science, leisure, health, even death. A comprehensive blueprint for an alternative society. A stark contrast to the Europe More knew.
Among its key themes, property sounds absolutely central and radical.
Perhaps the most radical. No private property in Utopia. Citizens equally benefit from common storehouses, sharing resources, goods, valuing measured pleasure, communal well-being over individual luxury.
A stark contrast to the land enclosures happening in England.
A confrontational contrast. Utopia poses that fundamental question: does private property truly serve the common good?
And their work-leisure balance. 6 hours a day, that sounds incredibly modern.
Progressive, even by today's standards. Not about idleness, but a deliberate design. Allows ample time for scientific, artistic pursuits, intellectual development, communal activities. It suggests a society valuing holistic growth, well-being, maybe more than just pure economic output. A powerful critique of that relentless pursuit of wealth and status in his own society.
What about religion, for a time of intense religious uniformity?
Remarkably striking. Utopians practice a pluralistic theology, tolerating a variety of beliefs, unified only by a minimal acceptance of the soul's immortality and divine providence.
But not atheism.
No, atheism is explicitly excluded. Perceived moral dangers. They believed a lack of belief in an afterlife removed the ultimate incentive for virtuous behavior. Still, this tolerance, though not absolute, was incredibly forward-thinking.
And the law. Few laws, no lawyers. That sounds, well, utopian.
Doesn't it? Utopians believe clear, concise laws are sufficient. Lawyers just complicate things. Criminal justice operates on a unique slavery basis.
Right.
Offenders become public servants, focused on reformation, contributing to society, rather than just punishment like execution, vastly different from the brutal, complex legal system of his time.
What's truly fascinating, you said, is the multitude of ways utopia has been read over the centuries.
Absolutely. Normative communist blueprint, ironic satirical critique, Christian Platonic ideal, anti-colonialist statement, feminist readings, each layer adds to its complexity. Shows how adaptable, how provocative the text is. It keeps forcing us to ask, what should an ideal society look like?
It's almost like more built in those ambiguities intentionally to invite ongoing debate, allowing the island of no place what utopia literally means to be reimagined by every generation.
That's a very compelling way to put it.
Yeah.
But Utopia wasn't his only significant contribution. His historical writing, particularly the history of Richard III, unfinished but highly influential.
Right. This shaped the image of Richard III as that ambitious tyrant, the one Shakespeare ran with.
Precisely. Crucial for subsequent Tudor historians. Written during Tudor consolidation, its portrayal served to legitimize the new dynasty by demonizing its predecessor.
But it wasn't straight history, was it? Rhetorical artistry, fictional dialogues. It blurs the line between fact and interpretation.
Absolutely. It serves as a prototype for the early modern political biography, which raises that important question about history writing back then.
What does it tell us? How did they see history?
It reveals history writing was often a blend. Factual reporting, yes, but also moral instruction, political commentary, literary artistry. Authors like Moore weren't just chroniclers. They were shapers of public memory, using historical narratives to convey broader moral truths, legitimize power, critique ills, less detached, evidence-based than our modern ideal, a tool for persuasion reflecting political needs.
Moving to his polemical and theological texts, he was a staunch defender of the Catholic Church against the Reformation.
Formidable. Authored significant anti-Luther, anti-Tyndale works, Dialogue Concerning Heresies, The Confutation of Tyndale's Answer, written in both Latin and vernacular English, aiming for broad reach.
And his big concern was translating the Bible into English, like Tyndale was doing.
Deep concern. He feared it would, as he put it, open the door to arbitrary interpretation of sacred scripture. Believed it would lead to countless private interpretations, threatening the Church's dogmatic integrity, its unified teaching authority, leading to fragmentation, spiritual chaos, which he saw happening with Protestant sects.
For Moore, the Church, guided by tradition and the Pope, was the sole authoritative interpreter.
Exactly. A bulwark against individual interpretation.
And finally, that unique, poignant body of work, his letters and prison writings.
We touched on them earlier, but worth reiterating their significance. Letters from the Tower, especially to his daughter Margaret Roper, a remarkable collection.
A blend of what? Christian stoicism.
Yes, profound Christian stoicism, accepting his fate, deep paternal affection, concern for his family, and meticulous legal argumentation, defending his conscience even from his cell.
More than just historical records, then.
Oh, much more. Seminal examples of prison literature. An unparalleled, intimate window into the mind of a man facing mortality. A profound moral dilemma. Offering deeply personal reflections on faith, family, suffering, the ultimate test of conscience. Solidifies his image as a man of profound intellectual and spiritual depth. Unwavering.
All these works, political philosophy, history, theology, they give us this invaluable window into his intricate philosophical underpinnings. And connecting this to the bigger picture, his humanism wasn't just academic study, was it?
Not at all. For Moore, the primary goal of education, of humanism itself, was character formation. Cultivating social responsibility, not just accumulating knowledge, but developing individuals with both intellectual rigor and moral virtue, able to contribute ethically to society. Learning shaping the soul as much as the mind.
And his mastery of Greek and Latin, that philological excellence, it wasn't just showing off.
No, for Moore, it meant making ancient authorities speak again. He saw deep engagement with classical texts as actively participating in a continuous, living historical dialogue, drawing on the wisdom, rhetoric, moral insights of the past to enrich the present, navigate its challenges, shape its future, accessing timeless truths.
And rhetoric itself, the art of persuasion, not just ornamentation.
For Moore, fundamentally a moral tool, an instrument for shaping society through ethical persuasion. Good rhetoric, inseparable from truth and virtue. Its purpose: to guide individuals towards the common good through reasoned argument, compelling presentation, using the power of words responsibly. Unlike, perhaps, Machiavelli's more pragmatic view.
Let's look at his political theory. Legitimacy of a monarch. It wasn't just divine right or force.
No. For more, legitimacy stemmed fundamentally from the monarch's ability to enact rational laws that truly ensured the welfare and prosperity of the people governed.
So power was a stewardship, limited by mercy and justice.
Exactly. A worldly stewardship of God's will, inherently limited, not absolute or arbitrary. And that recurring motif of the elected prince in Utopia suggests a sophisticated model, synthesizing monarchy and republican ideals. A ruler chosen by, accountable to the people, balancing strong leadership with popular consent, deeply progressive for an age of rising absolutism.
This nuanced view leads directly to his legal philosophy and that crucial institution of conscience, the core of his final stand.
Absolutely crucial. He meticulously differentiated between lex, positive command, human-made law, statutes, decrees, and isis,
This being
an abstract reflection of divine reason on earth, essentially natural law, God's eternal law.
And his distinction was the bedrock of his resistance.
The intellectual and spiritual framework. For more, conscience comes into play precisely when human law, lex, directly contradicts natural law, isis. In that conflict, his conscience, guided by divine reason and church tradition, demanded he prioritize the higher natural law.
So his disobedience to Henry wasn't treason in his eyes.
No, it was a personal, historical test of this very concept. He believed the king's law, the lex, was violating the isis, God's higher law. Therefore, his conscience demanded he prioritize the divine over the temporal, a stand rooted in profound principle, not political expediency.
Theologically, he tried to reconcile Augustine's inner church, that personal faith, with external tradition and ritual.
He didn't see them as contradictory but complementary components of a robust Christian life.
And he had this layered theory of knowledge, epistemology.
A sophisticated one. Faith rests upon reason. Rational inquiry paves the way for belief. Reason rests upon revelation, divine truths via scripture and tradition. And revelation itself rests upon the infallible authority of the church.
So that hierarchical structure established the church's essential role as authoritative interpreter against the reformers' individual interpretations.
Precisely. Provided a comprehensive framework, firmly establishing the church's authority.
And his interactions with contemporaries really highlight his unique position. He wasn't in isolation.
Not at all. His thought developed in parallel to, and often in direct contrast with, the leading minds of his day.
Like Machiavelli, The Prince came out just before Utopia.
Right, more championed a balance of virtue and utility. True statecraft required rulers to be morally upright and practically effective. Direct opposition to Machiavelli's stark pragmatism, prioritizing utility, power, efficiency above all, even traditional morality. More argued for the virtuous prince, Machiavelli for the effective prince, regardless of virtue.
Then Martin Luther. The Reformation ignites.
And more staunchly defended that centuries-old patristic canonical synthesis, the framework built on church fathers, canonical law against Luther's radical theology of individual salvation through faith alone, his rejection of papal authority, the fundamental theological cleavage of their time. More, the humanist, became a fierce polemicist for the Catholic establishment.
And finally, Erasmus, his dear friend.
Immense common ground. Humanist ideals of education, philology, calls for moral reform within the church, tolerance. Yet their ultimate paths diverged regarding the Reformation. Erasmus sought reform from within, refused to break with Rome, like More. But Erasmus was far more cautious, often critical of church excesses, less willing to embrace martyrdom.
Their friendship, though, a powerful example of intellectual collaboration, deep personal bonds amidst profound differences.
A true testament to the intellectual spirit of the age.
Clearly, More wasn't isolated. He was actively, passionately engaged in the most pressing debates, often defining the terms. And these debates, coupled with his ultimate actions, profoundly shaped his enduring legacy. How he's been reinterpreted.
His legacy begins naturally with the Catholic Church, the contrarian saint. In the 1570s post-Tridentine era, after the Council of Trent, the Church's response to the Reformation War was powerfully repositioned.
As a symbol.
A central figure, celebrated as a martyr of conscience, a symbol of unwavering resistance against encroaching secular authority, a potent example for Catholics facing persecution, especially in Protestant England.
Leading eventually to his canonization.
Formal canonization as a saint by Pope Pius VII in 1935, nearly 4 centuries after his death. And then Pope John Paul II declared him patron of statesmen and politicians in 2000, underscoring his modern relevance as a model for navigating ethical dilemmas in public service. Principled leadership.
What stands out to you here is how Utopia itself evolved in interpretation, from Republican readings to foundational socialist ones.
It's fascinating. 17th century English Commonwealth writers, Republicans, critics of social inequality, saw Utopia as an early blueprint for property criticism, saw that communal ownership vision is challenging existing structures, arguing for more equitable distribution.
And this continued into the 19th century with Marx and Engels.
Yes, Marx, Engels, later Karl Kautsky, leading theorists of scientific socialism, explicitly categorized More as a founding father of utopian socialism. They saw Utopia's abolition of private property, communal labor, focus on collective welfare as an early, albeit idealized, precursor to their own socialist ideals. Shows how a 16th century text could be reappropriated, seen as foundational to entirely different revolutionary ideologies centuries later. Speaks volumes about the radicalism in Utopia.
His story has also deeply permeated modern popular representations. Robert Bolt's play, A Man for All Seasons, and the film,
Hugely influential, confronted contemporary audiences with that paradox. Conscience versus overwhelming state power. Presented more as heroic, principled, chose integrity, spiritual conviction over survival. Cemented his heroic image for generations.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall trilogy, a radical reimagining.
Completely. Instead of the traditional heroic depiction, Mantel portrayed him as stern, unyielding, even dogmatic, often an antagonist to Thomas Cromwell. This stark contrast vividly demonstrates how historical figures, even seemingly fixed ones like More, can be continuously reevaluated, recontextualized, presented through entirely different lenses, challenging ingrained perceptions, forcing new conversations.
And these sophisticated reevaluations extend into current academic debates. Scholarship is still vibrant.
Absolutely. Quentin Skinner, renowned intellectual historian, reads Utopia within Renaissance rhetoric, views it less as a prescriptive blueprint, more as a sophisticated political simulation, an exercise in persuasio, provoking thought, not giving answers, a masterclass in rhetorical possibility.
J.H. Hexter emphasizes More's double narrative irony, meaning
Utopia should be read with a keen eye for its layers of irony, satire, suggesting more deliberately introduced ambiguities, even contradictions, to provoke the reader, making it far more complex, less straightforward than often assumed. A profound thought experiment.
A.S.G. Edwards looks at how political subtexts evolved through censorship, comparing early editions.
Yes, highlighting that dynamic, often fraught interaction between authorial intent and external pressures, political, religious authority during that turbulent era.
And feminist scholars critique the patriarchal model in Utopia, even in this ideal society.
They offer compelling critiques, pointing out that despite progressive ideas, certain hierarchical structures, gender norms from More's own time regrettably persist, underscoring the limitations of even most visionary thinkers of their age.
Finally, post-colonial critiques, finding problematic discovery ideology.
Yes, questioning underlying assumptions of European encounter, dominion, justification of conquest, implicit in how Utopia is founded, interacts with neighbors, revealing a complex tension between ideal commonwealth and colonial expansion.
So pulling all these diverse threads together, Thomas More emerges as truly unique, a liminal figure.
Straddling those intellectual spiritual divides, between late medieval scholasticism and Renaissance humanism, between reformist theologies and early modern state theories, he resists simple categorization.
Neither purely utopian nor strictly scholastic, neither bigoted theocrat nor entirely libertarian.
Complex, multifaceted, often paradoxical, refusing to be neatly pigeonholed.
Yeah.
Which is perhaps why he remains so compelling.
His life itself, that dramatic narrative, conscience clashing with the absolute forces of his era, king, state, reformation, and at the heart of it, that persistent universal question.
How can law and virtue be organized to truly secure the common good? How do we build a just and humane society?
Utopia offered that experimental lab, that ironic mirror, presenting radical possibilities while maybe subtly questioning their attainability.
While his legal theological writings, those poignant letters from the tower, testaments to the immense courage needed to face that question, live by one's convictions, in the tangible, often brutal world.
Across 4.5 centuries, his ideas have resonated everywhere. Papal courts, revolutionary clubs, literary stages, law schools. The fact he can be read as saint, dogmatist, proto-communist, champion of liberty
testifies to the rich, multi-layered meanings in his texts, the enduring power of his story.
To engage with Thomas More is to step into a living dialogue, started in early modern Europe, still very much alive today.
A conversation about reason and faith, property and solidarity, that fundamental, inescapable tension between authority and individual conscience.
Thomas More isn't just a historical personality in dusty textbooks. He's an enduring intellectual call, a persistent challenge. Every era turns to him when confronting its own crises of power, conviction, societal organization.
So the final question really is for you listening. What does his unwavering stand, his profound ideas challenge you to consider about where we stand today, faced with similar questions of conviction and power in your own life, your own society?